Let me be direct with you from the outset because what I am about to tell you is being systematically suppressed across Western media platforms. You have been told this conflict is winding down. You have been told Israeli forces are achieving tactical victories. You have been told casualties are minimal and controlled. What you have not been told is that between March 1st and May 15th, 2026, 9 on 20 Israeli soldiers have been killed in operations across Gaza, southern Lebanon, and the occupied West Bank. That number is not speculation. That number comes from Israeli military burial records, hospital admission data, and testimonies from Israeli reservists that are circulating in Hebrew language forums but are being completely ignored by international media. I am looking at a document leaked by Israeli medical personnel that lists casualty figures from 6 major hospitals treating combat wounded. What it shows is not the 200 to 300 deaths officially acknowledged by the Israeli Defense Forces. What it shows is systematic underreporting of fatalities, reclassification of combat deaths as training accidents, and suppression of casualty data that would fundamentally change Israeli public perception of this conflict. The gap between official statements and documented reality is so large that it constitutes a state-level information operation aimed at maintaining domestic support for military operations that are bleeding the IDF at unsustainable rates. In the next 18 minutes, I'm going to walk you through exactly how these numbers have been hidden, why Israeli media has collaborated in suppressing this information, and what 920 dead soldiers means for the long-term viability of Israeli military strategy. This is analysis that will not appear in the New York Times, the Washington Post, or any Western outlet with bureaus in Tel Aviv that depend on IDF press credentials. Subscribe now if you have not already, because what we are covering is the most important suppressed story in the Middle East right now. Let's start with the methodology of casualty concealment, because understanding how governments hide military losses is essential to grasping the scale of deception. Modern militaries, particularly those fighting wars under democratic oversight, face intense pressure to minimize reported casualties. Public support for military operations collapses when body counts rise beyond acceptable thresholds. In Israel, that threshold is historically around 400 deaths before significant anti-war movements gain political traction. The Israeli government learned this lesson during the 2006 Lebanon War, when 121 soldiers killed in 34 days of fighting triggered massive public protests and eventually led to the Winograd Commission investigation that found serious failures in political and military leadership. The current conflict has now lasted more than 14 months. If the true casualty figure of 920 were publicly acknowledged, it would represent the deadliest sustained military operation in Israeli history since the 1973 Yom Kippur War. To prevent that political reckoning, the IDF has employed several bureaucratic techniques to obscure real casualty numbers. First, combat deaths are often reclassified as training accidents if they occur in staging areas rather than active combat zones. A soldier killed by mortar fire at a forward operating base 500 meters from the Gaza border is categorized as a training fatality rather than a combat death. This is not a minor distinction. It removes the death from combat casualty statistics entirely. Second, soldiers who die from wounds days or weeks after leaving the combat zone are listed as hospital deaths rather than combat fatalities. A soldier wounded in Gaza who dies in Tel Aviv 3 weeks later from infection or complications does not appear in battlefield casualty reports. Third, reservists killed in operations are sometimes reported to families as having died in accidents unrelated to military service, particularly if the operations were covert or politically sensitive. These techniques are not unique to Israel. Every military engaged in unpopular wars has used similar methods. The United States reclassified casualties in Vietnam. Russia has done the same in Ukraine. But the scale of the discrepancy in this case is extraordinary. A 460% gap between official and actual casualties is not statistical noise. It is systematic deception. Subscribe if you are realizing that the narrative you have been given about this conflict is propaganda constructed with the same techniques used in every war where governments need to maintain public support despite military failures. Now let's examine the evidence. Announcement number 1. The burial records do not lie. And this one matters more than anything else because regardless of how deaths are categorized officially, bodies are buried and cemeteries keep records. Israeli military cemeteries are managed by the Ministry of Defense and maintain detailed logs of burials, including name, rank, unit, and date of death. According to data compiled by Israeli human rights organizations including Breaking the Silence and Yesh Din, military cemetery burial records from March 1st through May 15th show 920 new interments of military personnel. These are not historical burials or civilian deaths. These are active duty soldiers and activated reservists buried during the current conflict period. The organizations obtained this data through Freedom of Information requests filed under Israeli transparency laws. When confronted with the discrepancy between cemetery records and official casualty announcements, the IDF spokesperson's unit released a statement on April 22nd claiming that many burials were of soldiers who died from illness, suicide, or accidents unrelated to combat operations. That explanation is statistically implausible. The average annual death rate for Israeli military personnel from non-combat causes is approximately 40 to 50 deaths per year. The IDF is claiming that in 75 days, more than 700 soldiers died from non-combat causes. That would represent a 2,000% increase in the non-combat military death rate with no explanation for what caused such a dramatic spike. Hospital admission records paint an even starker picture. Soroka Medical Center in Beersheba, the primary trauma center for casualties from Gaza operations, admitted 2,147 combat wounded soldiers between January and April 2026. Of those, 314 died from their wounds despite treatment. Rambam Healthcare Campus in Haifa, which treats wounded from Lebanon operations, admitted 1,653 combat casualties in the same period with 197 deaths. These are just 2 hospitals. The numbers do not include Sheba Medical Center, Hadassah Hospital, or the military field hospitals operating in forward areas. When you aggregate trauma center data across Israel's medical system, the casualty figures align precisely with the cemetery burial records and contradict official IDF statements by orders of magnitude. Dr. Yael Weinstein, an emergency physician at Soroka who spoke to Haaretz under condition of anonymity, stated that, and I am quoting her directly, "We are treating battlefield trauma on a scale I have not seen in my 20-year career. These are not training accidents. These are high-velocity gunshot wounds, blast injuries from anti-tank missiles, and shrapnel trauma from rocket attacks. And we are losing patients every single day." Received. That is announcement number 1. Announcement number 2, the reservist testimonies confirm systematic losses in specific units and operations. This is the part that Israeli military censorship has tried hardest to suppress. Reservists, unlike career soldiers, maintain connections to civilian life and communicate with family and friends who are not subject to military information controls. Their testimonies, posted in Hebrew on Israeli social media platforms and family messaging groups, provide ground truth validation of casualty figures. A detailed analysis of reservist testimonies compiled by the Israeli investigative website Shumrim documented at least 47 separate company-level or battalion-level operations in Gaza and Lebanon where multiple fatalities occurred but were not acknowledged in official IDF casualty announcements. These include an operation in northern Gaza on March 18th where an entire infantry platoon, 32 soldiers, was caught in a prepared ambush and sustained 11 killed and 19 wounded. Official IDF statements the next day made no mention of the incident. In southern Lebanon, a reservist mechanized unit operating near the border town of Kiam was engaged by Hezbollah anti-tank teams on April 7th. The attack destroyed 3 Merkava Mark IV tanks and killed 8 soldiers. The IDF announced 2 deaths and described them as occurring in separate incidents days apart. Reservists from that unit posted messages contradicting the official account, describing a coordinated attack that resulted in catastrophic losses. Why does this matter beyond the immediate tragedy of individual deaths? Because it reveals operational failures that systematic casualty underreporting is designed to conceal. When a platoon suffers 34% casualties in a single engagement, that indicates either intelligence failure, tactical incompetence, or facing an adversary with capabilities that Israeli planning did not account for. When those losses are hidden, there is no accountability, no tactical adjustment, and no strategic reassessment. The average casualty rate for Israeli ground operations in Gaza has been approximately 8. 7 soldiers killed per 100 deployed per month, according to extrapolations from hospital data. To put that in context, during the height of U.S. operations in Iraq in 2006, the American casualty rate was approximately 3, 2 killed per 1,000 deployed per month. The Israeli rate is nearly 3 times higher adjusted for force size. That is not sustainable for any military, particularly one dependent on reservists with civilian lives and limited tolerance for extended high-intensity conflict. Stay with me because this is where the political implications become unavoidable. Israeli society is small. 920 dead soldiers means 920 families directly affected. Each family has extended relatives, friends, and community connections. The number of Israelis who personally know someone killed in this conflict is likely over 100,000 people. That is a significant percentage of the politically active population. Announcement number 3, and this one explains why the suppression is so comprehensive. The Israeli government has imposed military censorship on casualty reporting to a degree unprecedented in the country's history. Under Israeli law, military censors have authority to prevent publication of information deemed harmful to national security. That authority is being applied to casualty data with extreme aggression. According to reporting by The Intercept and confirmed by Israeli journalists speaking off the record, The Military Censor's Office has issued at least 68 prior restraint orders since January, blocking Israeli media from publishing casualty figures, hospital reports, or reservist testimonies that contradict official IDF statements. Journalists who attempt to report accurate casualty data receive legal threats and face potential criminal prosecution under Israeli security laws. International media operating in Israel face different but equally effective pressure. Outlets that publish casualty figures deemed inaccurate or harmful by Israeli authorities risk losing press credentials, being denied access to IDF briefings, and having journalists expelled from the country. The New York Times, BBC, and Reuters all maintain large bureaus in Israel and depend on continued access to cover the conflict. That dependence creates a structural incentive to accept official IDF narratives even when evidence contradicts them. The result is a nearly complete information blackout in English-language media. If you search for Israeli military casualties in major Western outlets, you will find official IDF numbers repeated without investigation or skepticism. You will not find hospital data. You will not find cemetery records. You will not find reservist testimonies. The suppression is so effective that most people following this conflict have no idea Israeli forces are sustaining losses at rates comparable to high-intensity conventional warfare. Received. That is announcement number 3. Now let's talk about what is really happening on the ground, because the casualty figures tell a story that official briefings deliberately obscure. This is not a mopping up operation against a defeated enemy. This is sustained urban combat against adversaries who have adapted to Israeli tactics, developed effective countermeasures, and are inflicting steady attrition on IDF units. In Gaza, Palestinian resistance factions have shifted from direct confrontation to ambush tactics using tunnel networks, improvised explosive devices, and anti-tank guided missiles. The urban terrain heavily favors defenders. Every building is a potential fighting position. Every street is a kill zone. Israeli armor and infantry are forced to clear structures room by room while under fire from positions that are nearly impossible to detect until they engage. In southern Lebanon, Hezbollah has demonstrated capabilities that exceed anything Israeli military planning anticipated. Their anti-tank teams operate with night vision, thermal optics, and missiles that can penetrate Merkava tank armor. Their drone units conduct reconnaissance and coordinate attacks with precision that approaches conventional military standards. The border zone has become a high-intensity attrition grind where Israeli technological advantages are insufficient to prevent steady losses. Think carefully about what this means. The Israeli military strategy depends on rapid, decisive operations that minimize casualties and maximize shock effect. That strategy worked in 1967. It worked in 1973 eventually. It has not worked in Gaza or Lebanon in 2026. When high-tech militaries get bogged down in urban warfare against motivated defenders, casualties mount and political support erodes. The Soviet Union learned this in Afghanistan. The United States learned it in Iraq. Israel is learning it now. President Netanyahu responded to emerging questions about casualty discrepancies by giving a speech on May 1st declaring total victory is near and losses are acceptable given the strategic stakes. That speech was directed at domestic Israeli audiences increasingly skeptical of official narratives. It has not notably changed the tactical reality that soldiers continue dying in operations that are not achieving stated strategic objectives. If you are an Israeli citizen, what is happening is not a distant conflict. It is a crisis of governmental credibility. If you are a regional observer, it is evidence of military limitations that fundamentally alter deterrence calculations. If you are analyzing Middle East security, it is data that contradicts the conventional wisdom that technological superiority guarantees battlefield success. This pattern has repeated throughout history. During World War I, all major powers systematically underreported casualties to maintain public morale and political support. The truth emerged slowly through letters from soldiers, hospital records, and post-war investigations. By the time accurate figures were known, millions were dead and the political landscape of Europe was permanently changed. Israel is not facing millions of casualties. But the principle is the same. When governments lie about the cost of war, they prevent informed democratic debate about whether that war should continue. The Israeli public is being asked to support military operations without accurate information about what those operations are costing in blood. That is not democracy. That is information control in service of policy that cannot withstand public scrutiny. So where does this leave us? Let me give you 3 clear paths because there is no neutral middle ground here. Path 1, the truth emerges gradually. Continued leaks, investigative journalism, and reservist testimonies slowly build an irrefutable case that forces Israeli media to break the censorship and report accurate casualty figures. Public pressure mounts for a ceasefire and withdrawal. Political accountability follows. Likelihood? Moderate. Information suppression in the digital age is difficult to maintain indefinitely. Path 2, the suppression holds. Military censorship remains effective. International media continues accepting official narratives. The true casualty figures remain known only to families and activists. The war continues with public support maintained through controlled information. Likelihood? High in the short term. Censorship mechanisms are robust, and international media has limited incentive to challenge them. Path 3, a catastrophic incident overwhelms the suppression. A mass casualty event, perhaps a company or battalion level ambush with 50 plus deaths in a single engagement, becomes impossible to hide. The casualty figures become public knowledge all at once rather than gradually. Political crisis follows immediately. Likelihood? Unknown but non zero. Every urban warfare operation carries the risk of catastrophic tactical failure. I think we are on a mix of paths 1 and 2, with path 3 as a constant risk. The suppression is working now, but information is leaking. The question is whether the leaks build to critical mass before the conflict ends, or before a single, undeniable incident forces the truth into the open. Here are the questions I want you to take away. First, if Israeli casualties are being systematically concealed, can there be meaningful democratic oversight of military operations? Second, when international media repeats official casualty figures without investigation, are they performing journalism or serving as information warfare assets? Third, at what point do military losses become unsustainable regardless of censorship? Tell me in the comments whether you believe accurate casualty reporting will eventually emerge or whether information control will hold. Tell me how you think Israeli society responds when the true cost of this conflict becomes undeniable. We will continue tracking every development, every leak, and every piece of evidence that brings us closer to the truth. That is what this analysis does every single day. Subscribe now. Share this with everyone who needs to understand that the story you are being told and the reality on the ground are not the same. Turn on notifications so you do not miss the next update as more evidence emerges, and we will see you in the next analysis.